The night before April 25, 1915, the waters of the Dardanelles shivered under a moonless sky while hundreds of wooden landing craft bobbed like silent predators. In the cramped holds of the SS River Clyde, the first wave of Australian and New Zealand troops tightened their boots, their faces illuminated only by the flicker of oil lamps. What would happen when those men finally stepped onto the cliffs of Gallipoli? The answer would reshape empires, forge legends, and leave a scar that still haunts the peninsula today. Within the first 2 minutes of this story, you will learn why the Allied command, convinced that a swift amphibious strike could force the Ottoman Empire out of the war, chose a narrow, heavily defended shoreline, and how that decision ignited a conflict that lasted 8 brutal months. The core conflict is simple: a meticulously planned Theban invasion meeting an unexpectedly resilient Ottoman defense, each side fighting for survival, honor, and strategic advantage. The strategic imperative: by early 1915, the Allied powers faced a stalemate on the Western Front. British Prime Minister H.H. Asquith and French Premier René Viviani believed that knocking the Ottoman Empire out of the war would open a sea route to Russia and relieve pressure on the Eastern Front. The Dardanelles, a narrow strait linking the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea, became the focal point of this strategy. Controlling the strait would allow Allied warships to deliver supplies to the Russian port of Constantinople and potentially force the Ottoman capital, Istanbul, into surrender. The Admiralty assembled a fleet of 10 battleships, 8 cruisers, and dozens of destroyers for a naval bombardment that began on February 19, 1915. Despite sinking several Ottoman forts, the fleet failed to silence the coastal artillery, and mines laid by Ottoman engineers sank the battleship HMS Irresistible and the French battleship Bouve. The naval failure forced the Allies to consider a land invasion to neutralize the forts and secure the Strait. General Sir Ian Hamilton, commander of the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, was tasked with translating the naval plan into an amphibious operation. His staff estimated that 30,000 troops could land within 48 hours, secure the peninsula, and force the Ottoman government to capitulate. The plan hinged on surprise, speed, and the belief that the Ottoman forces stretched thin after the Balkan Wars would crumble under a coordinated assault. Planning the amphibious assault planning process began in March 1915 at the headquarters of the British War Office in London. Engineers from the Royal Engineers and the Australian Imperial Force drafted detailed beach charts, marking potential landing zones, obstacles, and the locations of Ottoman artillery. The charts identified 2 primary sectors: the northern beaches of the Glyply Peninsula, later called ANZAC, and the southern headland of Capellus. Logistical preparations involved loading over 50,000 men, 1,500 horses, and 300 artillery pieces onto a convoy of more than 70 transport ships. The convoy departed from Alexandria on April 15, 1915, escorted by the same battleships that had bombarded the Dardanelles a month earlier. The troops included 8,000 Australian and New Zealand volunteers, 12,000 British regulars, 5,000 French colonial troops, and a small contingent of Indian soldiers. Intelligence reports suggested that the Ottoman garrison on the peninsula numbered approximately 20,000, commanded by Colonel Mustafa Kemal, a junior officer who would later become Ataturk. However, the Allies underestimated the Ottomans' ability to mobilize additional forces from nearby Anatolia, a fatal miscalculation. On April 24, 1915, the Allied fleet initiated the naval prelude and first bombardment entered the Dardanelles for a final intensive bombardment, with battleships opening fire on the forts at Kunkale, Karbatiep, and Sidolbi here, delivering a combined salvo of over 1,200 shells. Ottoman engineers, anticipating the attack, had reinforced the forts with concrete and sandbags, reducing the effectiveness of the shelling simultaneously. Ottoman minesweeping crews worked under cover of darkness to clear the channels for the landing craft. By nightfall, they had successfully removed or marked 30 of the 45 known mines, but 15 remained hidden in the shallower waters near the landing beaches. The presence of these mines would later cause the loss of several British and Australian landing craft during the initial assault. The naval bombardment concluded at 10 p.m. local time, leaving the forts partially damaged but still operational. The Allied commanders, confident that the forts were neutralized, ordered the convoy to set sail for the peninsula at dawn. At 4:30 on April 25, 1915, the first wave of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, began its descent from the SS River Clyde. The landing craft, known as beach ladders, were overloaded with 2,000 men, rifles, and a few field guns. As they approached the steep cliffs of what would become ANZAC Cove, Ottoman machine gunfire erupted from concealed positions on the high ground of the Sari Bear Ridge. Because the landing craft were forced to turn sharply to avoid the remaining mines, many capsized in the surf. Approximately 600 men were either killed, wounded, or swept back into the sea before reaching the shore. The survivors scrambled up the narrow, rocky beach, forming a disorganized line that stretched only 200 meters along the shoreline. Colonel William Birdwood, commander of the ANZAC forces, ordered a rapid consolidation of the beach within 2 hours. The ANZAC troops established a tenuous perimeter that extended to the headland known as Lone Pine. However, the Ottoman defenders, now reinforced by units under Mustafa Kemal, launched a counterattack that pushed the ANZAC line back toward the beach, creating a chaotic melee that lasted until nightfall. The landing at ANZAC Cove revealed 3 critical failures: inadequate reconnaissance of the terrain, insufficient suppression of Ottoman fire, and the inability to secure the high ground that overlooked the beach. These failures set the stage for a prolonged stalemate. Hellese, while ANZAC forces struggled on the northern coast, a second wave targeted the southern tip of the peninsula. At 5 o'clock on April 25, 1915, the British 29th Division, the Royal Naval Division, and French troops began disembarking at 5 beaches designated V, W, X, Y, and Z. Beach V, near the village of Sadolbahir, was the primary objective because it offered a direct route to the Ottoman forts. The Ottoman defenders at Cape Hellese had prepared a series of interlocking fields of fire, reinforced by barbed wire and artillery positioned on the heights of the Ocho Baba Ridge as British troops advanced across shallow sand, encountering barrage of rifle fire and shell fragments. The 29th Division suffered approximately 2,000 casualties, including the loss of its commanding officer, Major General Alma Hunter Weston, who was wounded and evacuated. Despite the heavy losses, the British managed to capture the first line of Ottoman trenches on Beach W. However, subsequent attempts to push inland toward the Ocho Baba Ridge were repelled by well-coordinated Ottoman counterattacks. By the end of the day, the Allies had secured a fragmented foothold along the southern coastline but failed to achieve a breakthrough toward the interior. The Cape Hellese landing demonstrated the difficulty of moving troops across exposed beaches under fire and highlighted the importance of artillery support, which the Allies had underestimated due to the belief that naval bombardment would neutralize the Ottoman guns. The Ottoman counteroffensive began within 24 hours of the landings. Drawing on reserve units for the 19th Division and local militia, Kemal positioned his forces on the high ground of the Saribert Ridge, overlooking both ANZAC Cove and the southern beaches. He ordered a series of night raids aimed at disrupting Allied supply lines and preventing the establishment of a continuous front. On April 27, 1915. Ottoman troops launched a coordinated assault on the ANZAC position at Lone Pine. Using hand-thrown grenades and close-quarter banner attacks, they inflicted 800 casualties on the ANZAC side while sustaining 600 losses themselves. The attack forced the ANZAC troops to retreat further inland, consolidating their positions around the high ground of Tunak Baya. Simultaneously, Ottoman artillery units repositioned to fire upon the British supply depots at Cape Hellese. The resulting shelling destroyed 30% of the Allied ammunition stockpiles and forced the British to ration artillery shells for the remainder of the campaign. Kemal's aggressive defense turned the initial Allied advantage into a costly stalemate, demonstrating that the Ottoman forces could not only hold their ground but also launch offensive. By early May 1915, both sides recognized that the campaign would not be resolved in a single week. The Allies dispatched an additional 50,000 troops, including the 10th Irish Division and the 13th Western Division, to reinforce the peninsula. The Ottoman Empire responded by moving the 5th and 6th Divisions from the Caucasus front, increasing its defensive strength to roughly 40,000 men. The terrain of the Gallipoli Peninsula, characterized by steep ridges, narrow valleys, and dense scrub, limited the effectiveness of large-scale maneuvers. Trench warfare, similar to that on the Western Front, quickly emerged. By mid-June, the front line stretched for 30 kilometers, with both sides entrenched in a network of communication trenches, dugouts, and artillery positions. During this period, the Allies attempted several offensives, including the August 6, 1915 Battle of Sari Bay, which aimed to capture the high ground that dominated the peninsula. The attack, led by the New Zealand Mounted Rifles and Australian Light Horse, initially succeeded in seizing the summit of Tunak Bay but was soon repulsed by a determined Ottoman counterattack. The battle resulted in 7,000 Allied casualties and 5,000 Ottoman casualties, underscoring the futility of frontal assaults against well-prepared positions. The human cost. The Gallipoli campaign inflicted a staggering human toll. Allied records indicate that approximately 252,000 soldiers were wounded, killed, or went missing during the 8-month operation. The British Empire suffered 44,000 deaths, the French 12,000, and the ANZAC forces 26,000. Ottoman casualties are estimated at 250,000, including 86,000 killed and 115,000 wounded, according to Ottoman military archives, disease compounded the battlefield losses. Dysentery, typhus, and malaria spread rapidly in the unsanitary trench conditions, accounting for an additional 30,000 Allied deaths. Ottoman medical services, strained by limited supplies, reported similar rates of disease-related mortality. The psychological impact was equally profound. Letters from soldiers described the constant roar of artillery, the smell of cordite, and the sight of comrades falling in the mud. The shared trauma forged a collective memory that continues to shape national identities in Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Aftermath by December 1915, the strategic situation had become untenable for the Allies. The naval blockade of the Dardanelles had failed to force Ottoman surrender, and the High Command recognized that further assaults would only increase casualties. General Hamilton received orders to evacuate the peninsula. The evacuation, executed between December 19th and January 9th, 1916, became one of the most efficiently managed withdrawals of the war. Using a combination of silent night movements, concealed boats, and decoy artillery fire, the Allies removed approximately 100,000 troops without a single fatality caused by enemy fire. The last soldiers left the southern beach of Cape Helles on January 9, 1916, marking the end of the Gallipoli campaign die and the political arena. The failure at Gallipoli contributed to the resignation of British First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill in May 1915. In the Ottoman Empire, Mustafa Kemal's leadership during the campaign propelled him to national prominence, eventually leading to his role as the founder of modern Turkey legacy and lessons the Gallipoli campaign left an indelible mark on military doctrine. It highlighted the challenges of amphibious operations, the necessity of accurate intelligence, and the importance of securing high ground before attempting a beach landing. Modern amphibious assaults, such as the Normandy landings in 1944, incorporated lessons learned from Gallipoli, including the use of specialized landing craft, pre-landing bombardment coordination, and the establishment of beachheads with rapid logistical support. Culturally, the campaign is commemorated annually on April 25th as ANZAC Day in Australia and New Zealand, a day of remembrance that honors the sacrifice of the original landing forces. In Turkey, the event is known as Çanakkale Zafari, the victory of Çanakkale, celebrated as a defining moment of national resilience. The story of the Gallipoli disembarkation remains a powerful reminder that strategic ambition, when divorced from realistic assessment of terrain, enemy capability, and logistical constraints, can lead to costly stalemate. Yet it also illustrates how adversity can forge enduring national narratives and drive innovation in military practice. If you found this deep dive into the Gallipoli campaign compelling, subscribe to Stunning Revelations for more meticulously researched histories that uncover hidden forces shaping our world.